On the evening of November 10, 1975, 29 men vanished from the face of Lake Superior. No distress call, no evacuation, no survivors. The SS Edmund Fitzgerald, the largest ship on the Great Lakes, broke apart and sank in a storm so violent it defied everything her crew had ever known. And to this day, no one can say with certainty what destroyed her. This is not just a shipwreck story. This is the story of how an entire industry's assumptions about freshwater sailing were proven catastrophically wrong in under 12 minutes. The Edmund Fitzgerald was launched in 1958 at the Great Lakes Engineering Works in River Rouge, Michigan. At 729 feet long, she was the biggest freighter on the lakes, and she held that title for 17 years. She was a workhorse, built to haul taconite pellets, iron ore processed into dense marble-sized balls, from the mines of Minnesota to the steel mills of Detroit and Toledo. She broke cargo records repeatedly. Her crew loved her. Locals along the lakes knew her by sight. She even had a nickname. They called her the Fitz. But what most people did not know, and what investigators would only piece together later, was that the Fitz had a history of problems. Minor groundings, damage to her hull, cracks that were repaired but never fully explained. She had hit a wall in the Sulaks in 1969 and a lock wall again in 1970. There were whispered concerns among mariners about her structural integrity. Still, she kept sailing. She kept earning. And on November 9, 1975, she departed Superior, Wisconsin, loaded with 26,116 long tons of taconite pellets, bound for a steel mill near Detroit. The weather forecast that day called for a storm. Not unusual for November on Lake Superior. The lakes are notorious in late autumn when Arctic air collides with lingering surface warmth and generates cyclones that rival anything on the open ocean. Captain Ernest McSorley, a seasoned mariner with decades of experience, was well aware of what November could bring. He had a plan. He would take a northern route, hugging the Canadian shore, using the landmass as a windbreak. It was the smart, conservative play. Sailing roughly the same route was the SS Arthur M. Anderson, captained by Jesse Cooper. The two ships were in radio contact and would remain so throughout the voyage. This partnership, this thread of communication between the two vessels, would become one of the most haunting elements of the entire disaster. Because the Anderson saw everything, and then she saw nothing. By the afternoon of November 10th, the storm had intensified beyond all predictions. Winds exceeded 70 miles per hour. Waves climbed past 25 feet, with some reports estimating 35. The Fitzgerald and the Anderson were both being hammered. Around 3:30 in the afternoon, McSorley radioed Cooper with a chilling update. The Fitzgerald had lost both radar units. She had a fence rail down. She was taking on a list, and she was taking on water. Think about that for a moment. A 729-foot ship, the Queen of the Great Lakes, was going blind in a storm that was tearing the lake apart. No radar meant no way to track nearby shoals, no way to see other vessels, no way to navigate except by compass and instinct. McSorley asked the Anderson to keep track of the Fitzgerald on their radar and guide them toward the safety of Whitefish Bay. Cooper agreed. For the next several hours, the Anderson tracked the Fitzgerald on its radar screen, watching the blip that represented 29 men pushing through a nightmare. The two ships exchanged updates. McSorley reported that his pumps were working. He was holding his own. But his voice, according to Cooper, carried something unusual. Not panic, something quieter. A man managing a situation he knew was slipping beyond his control. At 7:10 that evening, Cooper radioed the Fitzgerald to check in. He told McSorley that a vessel was approaching and asked how they were doing. McSorley responded with what would become the last words anyone ever heard from the Edmund Fitzgerald. "We are holding our own." 10 minutes later, the Anderson's radar operator looked at his screen. The Fitzgerald's blip was gone. No gradual fade, no drift, just gone. Cooper tried to raise the Fitzgerald on the radio. Nothing. He tried again. Silence. He contacted the Coast Guard. A search was launched, but the storm made it nearly impossible. By the time conditions allowed aircraft to fly over the area, all they found was debris, a lifeboat smashed to pieces, life jackets, an oil slick. The Fitzgerald had gone down in approximately 530 feet of water, about 17 miles from the entrance to Whitefish Bay. She was so close to safety that it defies comprehension. 17 miles. In calmer weather, that distance would have taken less than an hour. The official investigation by the National Transportation Safety Board concluded that the most likely cause was the progressive flooding of the cargo hold through ineffective hatch closures. In simple terms, the hatches that sealed the cargo bays were not watertight in those conditions, and as water poured in, the ship gradually lost buoyancy until she dove bow first into the lake bed. The Coast Guard's Marine Board of Investigation largely agreed, though they also pointed to possible shoaling, suggesting the Fitzgerald may have scraped bottom near 6 Fathom Shoal, compromising her hull. But Captain Cooper of the Anderson had a different theory, one shared by many experienced Lakers. He believed the Fitzgerald suffered catastrophic structural failure, that the ship simply broke apart on the surface, snapped by the force of the waves, and the wreck site, when it was finally surveyed, offered disturbing support for this. The Fitzgerald was found in 2 pieces. The bow section and the stern section lay roughly 170 feet apart, with a massive debris field between them. The midsection was obliterated. If you're finding yourself gripped by this story and you want to see more deep dives into the mysteries, the ocean and the Great Lakes refuse to give up, take a second and hit subscribe. These are the kinds of stories that deserve to be remembered, and your support helps bring them to the surface. Here is what makes the Fitzgerald disaster so deeply unsettling. We know the ship sank, we know when, we know approximately where. We even have the wreckage on the lake floor, but we do not know why, not definitively. Every theory has evidence supporting it and evidence contradicting it. The hatch theory does not fully explain the speed of the sinking. The structural failure theory does not fully account for McSorley's relatively calm demeanor in his final communications. The shoaling theory lacks definitive proof. And then there is the human dimension. 29 men died, and not one of them had time to put on a life jacket, deploy a raft, or send a distress signal. Whatever happened to the Fitzgerald happened so fast that an entire crew was simply swallowed. The ship did not slowly settle. She did not give her men a fighting chance. She went from sailing to gone in what investigators believe was less than 10 seconds. The families of the crew fought for years to have the wreck treated as a gravesite. In 1995, a diving expedition recovered the ship's bell, which now sits in the Great Lakes Shipwreck Historical Museum at Whitefish Point, inscribed with the names of all 29 crew members. Every November 10th, the bell is rung 29 times, once for each man, followed by a 30th ring for all mariners lost on the Great Lakes. The Edmund Fitzgerald was not the first ship to sink on Superior, and she was not the last. But she became the defining symbol of the lake's power and indifference. She was the ship that proved size meant nothing against the right storm. She was the reminder that freshwater seas are not lesser oceans. They are something else entirely, shallower, colder, and in many ways more unpredictable. Waves on the Great Lakes are steeper and more closely spaced than ocean waves, giving a ship less time to recover between impacts. Superior does not care how big you are. Somewhere on the bottom of Lake Superior, in the permanent darkness of 530 feet of cold, fresh water, the Edmund Fitzgerald rests in 2 shattered halves. Her cargo of taconite pellets spills from the wound between her bow and stern like entrails. Her crew remains aboard, and the lake above her, as it has for 10,000 years, says absolutely nothing.